Good morning, everybody. My name is David Ford. I'm the department head of the Ralph E. Martin Department of Chemical Engineering. On behalf of the department, I want to welcome you all here this morning and thank you for being here at this reboot of the RN Maddox lecture series in chemical engineering. I'd like to start this off by saying a few words about Dr. Maddox, our benefactor and the supporter whose generosity has enabled this lecture series. Dr. Maddox was born in Winslow, Arkansas in 1925. He received his bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from our department in 1948. He moved to the University of Oklahoma, where he received his master's degree, then moved to Oklahoma State University to work on his PhD. He got his PhD there in 1954, and immediately his talent was recognized by that department, and he started an assistant professor position there immediately upon completion of his PhD. By 1958, just 4 years later, he was full professor and department head in the department. So, and that's a position that he held until 1977. So this is remarkable to me. I have troubles imagining finishing the 5 years of this job, much less serving in it for 20. So that really speaks to the remarkable talents of Dr. Maddox and his abilities and what he was able to achieve. He was called one of the founding fathers of modern-day computing in chemical engineering. He had over 150 technical publications and taught 90 different short courses, both in professional societies and also at companies, which again is quite remarkable. He was a leader in our American Institute of Chemical Engineering, our nationwide chemical engineering organization. He was a fellow of AICHE and also received the Founders Award, a major award from that organization. He was also active in the American Chemical Society and the Oklahoma Society of Professional Engineers. He passed away in 2008, but his contributions are still remembered through the lives that he touched and the programs that he supported, like this lecture series. So again, we're really pleased to introduce what's sort of a reboot of this lecture series with a focus on diversity and inclusion in science and engineering. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Jamie Hestekin, who's a professor of chemical engineering and the chair of our working group on diversity and inclusion in the department.
Thank you, Dr. Ford, and thanks everyone for being here today. I think that this is the biggest seminar I've ever been a part of at the University of Arkansas, so it's really cool to have that going for such an important topic. So as Dave said, we put this together with the working group on diversity and inclusion, which includes myself, Thomas Carter from the Dean's Office, Lauren Greenlee from Chemical Engineering, Tom Spicer from Chemical Engineering, and we have an alumni, Kaylin Spate, who is involved with this as well. So we're really excited about what's going on. And if you're watching this should be live streamed, this should be taped, and there are other seminar series in the Maddox series that on the same topic should also be on the website, so have a look out for that as you're going. I think it's really cool that we're introducing Felecia as part of the Maddox seminar series, because if you look at her own resume, it shows that same sort of meteoric rise that we were talking about with Professor Maddox. So she received her BS in chemistry from Elkhorn State University, and then from that she actually started here for a brief period of time, and then unfortunately her advisor went off to Toledo, and so she's a Toledo alum in engineering, both with an MS and PhD, but Toledo's very proud of her. We're very proud of her accomplishments as well. She then went on and started at 2003 as an assistant professor at Prairie View A&M, and by 2010 was acting provost. And so if you think about that sort of rise, yeah, John's shaking his head like I can't even come up with what's going on there. She is now provost and senior vice president for academic affairs at Prairie View A&M, with accomplishments too great to even mention. One I'm going to mention because she ran a North American Membrane Society meeting, since remembering her chemical engineering roots and things like that. And that's at the time she was acting provost when she was doing that. So I am extremely excited and thrilled to be able to introduce Provost Nave.
Good morning. So hopefully I'm going to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, which means deliver the presentation and also move these slides along as well. Well, thank you all for attending and live streaming today's seminar, where we will have a conversation and open dialogue about diversity and inclusion. As Jamie said, I am Felecia Nave, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Provost and Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs, a position that I've had the privilege of serving since fall 2014. I would like to first begin by extending a heartfelt thank you to Jamie and David for inviting me to deliver today's seminar, Relaunching the R.N. Maddox Lecture Series. It is truly an honor. As Jamie briefly mentioned, what does not show up on my CV or profile is that I began my graduate education at the University of Arkansas. And so in some ways, it has a feeling of returning to where it all started, to discuss a topic that influenced my growth and my development. When Jamie asked me if I would be willing to speak, because he is such a great colleague and a sweetheart, I couldn't turn him down. He briefly shared with me some of his concerns and challenges the college was experiencing and gave me a general idea of what he would like me to speak about to some students in the class. My initial thoughts were, no problem. I enjoy talking to students, something that I don't get to really do as much anymore unless they're in trouble. I see all the kids with trouble. And encouraging them to excel and explore new possibilities. Then he sent me a message on Facebook, for which, yes, I struggled to try to pull off. And he said, well, I've been out really drumming up the topic and the support and people to come see you. And so the attendance is a little larger than the class, and I think we're going to live stream it. It's going to be some faculty and staff. I was like, oh, okay, wonderful. While looking at my assistant, Rochelle, saying, oh, my. We talked a bit over what he wanted me to speak on that ultimately would provide a meaningful dialogue to a diverse audience so that everyone could walk away with practical ideas and some key takeaways to use to continue this conversation. Because the conversation around diversity and inclusion is not one you just have at a seminar. If it is to be impactful, it's one that you have to continue in an ongoing and meaningful way. So then I turned to Rochelle and I blurted out, I belong. And Rochelle looked at me and she said, where? I said, the title. She said, oh, yeah, great, I got it. So the significance of why I thought that title was so good, because the I belong is an affirmative statement. It's designed to, one, challenge those who do not see the value or the place for the diversity and inclusion. Two, to inspire those who may not see themselves as belonging in the environment. And three, to leave a call to action so that once the presentation is over, the conversation continues. In today's climate, this type of dialogue and discussion is more important than ever. Every day when you turn on the TV, the news, the internet, we hear and see reports that indicate that our country is more divided than ever, with both sides being more and more polarized. The core issues that continue to divide us are not easy topics, but they're conversations that must occur if we ever expect to start moving the needle toward inclusion. Thus, I commend you all for your willingness to engage in this discussion in a meaningful way in order to impact the broader campus the broader campus environment for everyone who chooses to be a part of the University of Arkansas community. To guide today's presentation, I'll speak on, very briefly, 5 general topic areas. My pathway and experience. We'll talk a little bit about the values of having a diverse and inclusive environment. I'll share with you my thoughts on the value of HBCUs in creating authentic and sustainable partnerships, and finish it off with providing some food for thought. So this is the great state of Mississippi, for which I hail. I am from a small town in Mississippi called Prentice, and this is just to give you a little background on me. The seat of Jefferson Davis County. It is a small town, about 1,500 people. I come from a long line of K through 12 educators raised rich in Southern tradition, Baptist training, and family and community. It was expected that I excelled in academics and that I would go on to obtain a college degree. My 8th grade educated grandmother, the smartest lady I ever knew, instilled in us all the value of an education and the promise and opportunities provided from earning a degree. Thus, of course, I believed and trusted in her wisdom, graduated in the tops of my high school class, and naturally continued on to college. I started college after the summer of my senior year in the first cohort of what is known now as the Lewis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation, a 5-week summer program, and majored in chemistry at Alcorn State University. Alcorn is a historically black university located in Lorman, Mississippi, and at the time I attended had about 1,800 students. There are now around 4,000 students. We're all under pressures to grow. The Provost will attest to that. The nurturing and development, both academic and personal, I received supported my growth as a young woman and increased my awareness of career opportunities in STEM as well as graduate school. The personal and sometimes, or should I say, oftentimes, intrusive mentorship and guidance I received from the faculty and staff felt like an extension of home. Thus, my trust in faculty and it harnessed a sense of belonging and welcome. At the time, I hope it is still the case, the University of Arkansas had a good relationship with Alcorn, coming to the campus to recruit students into graduate programs, and I must say, Arkansas rolled out the red carpet during their recruiting during our visits. And I took you all up on the offer. I started the program in chemical engineering in 1997, but transferred to the University of Toledo as a result of my advisor deciding to move. Dr. Beidel tried to get me to stay, but ultimately we went ahead and we moved to Toledo. But I'll come back to my Arkansas experience a little later on. I subsequently completed my doctorate degree in engineering from the University of Toledo, and in 2003 accepted a faculty position as an assistant professor of chemical engineering at Prairie View A&M University, another HBCU in Texas. I have been extremely blessed to have experienced an exceptional professional growth at the university, matriculating through the academic ranks and to professor and transitioning to the administrative level, first as an associate provost, and then provost senior vice president for academic affairs. As the provost, I have the privilege of serving at an institution that has been around for 140 years. We've continuously provided access to educational opportunities for students who without PV may not have been afforded the opportunity. Prairie View has continued to continuously evolve to meet the changing demands and needs of students in the state of Texas. It has grown from offering primarily teaching degrees to now offering degree programs in more than 35 academic disciplines, 26 master's, and 5 doctoral degrees. Although the majority of our students hail from Texas, PV attracts students from 41 states, as well as 44 countries from across the globe. Now this is our standard provost statement that gives you an idea of what we're responsible for in our mission, but in general, I am responsible for ensuring that we provide the highest academic standards and creating and maintaining environments that support student learning and success of all students. So now that you know a little bit more about me, my path, and what it is that I do, we'll talk a little bit more about diversity and where we are in this country. The undergraduate enrollment in colleges and universities around the country reflect the increasing diversity of the U.S. college-age population. In particular, there is strong growth in the Hispanic population around the country. More women continue to enroll in college than males, and by 2060, it is projected that 56% of the population will be minority. Yet in many of our institutions, the educational model that governs how we teach, how we structure support services, etc., continues to be built around a Eurocentric, male-dominated model that thus far has not provided the level of support often required to support women and underrepresented minority students. For engineering, although the number of women earning degrees in engineering has increased over the past 12 years, the overall percentage of women entering and thus graduating has not really changed. Likewise, when you look at underrepresented minorities, the statistics bear the same. When I talk to colleagues, this is a stat where I guess individually is important and something to celebrate. At the same time, it speaks to a sad truth. When my doctorate degree was confirmed in 2005, I could literally pick myself out of the statistics that NSF compiles each year. Because in that year, I was the only African-American female awarded a PhD in chemical engineering. And that was in 2005. And we haven't made the type of progress we need in 2017. When we look at the workforce, white men comprise about 1/2 of all scientists and engineers employed in science and engineering occupations, and in all racial groups, more men than women work in science and engineering. Looking at the stats, it is important to ask the question, who has a vested interest in supporting diversity and inclusion? I would say everyone does. According to a recent report titled Diversity Matters, released by McKinsey & Company, for financial companies in the top quartile that are more racially and gender diverse, they outperform the national norms by 35% and 15% respectively. So there's a benefit to having everyone around the table. Likewise, PricewaterhouseCoopers found that having a strategy to promote diversity and inclusion helps financial services organizations in such things as 85% enhancing business performance, 79% advanced customer satisfaction, 79% advanced innovation. Again, diversity matters. These reports are not shocking to many of you in the room for whom this is a passion and who focus on diversity. But these results, I would say, are not limited to financial services, but also translates to institutions as well. The more people you invite to the party, the better the party will be. It matters to the bottom line when different perspectives are included at the decision-making table. It is a fact that everyone is not convinced. But still, I think the numbers and the statistics bear out that greater representation is what is required. In a report released by Freeman Hrabowski in 2011, he stated that the process of cultural change begins with a focus on inclusiveness. And when institutions recognize the need to improve and when they determine the priorities most critical to that improvement, the most important challenge is convincing people to consider the evidence. So inclusion requires a culture change, moving from checking the box to truly integrating an inclusive theoretical framework throughout the fabric of the culture and environment of the organization. It requires more than changing the minds, but more importantly, changing the hearts of the individuals to get them to buy in and to trust that the change is a win-win for everyone, and that increasing diversity does not decrease someone else's position. So I think this slide really hits the point. Diversity is being invited to the dance. Inclusion is being invited to dance. So do we all recognize the difference? I can recall when I first went off to college and I got invited to my first Greek dance with friends. Well, all my friends were asked to dance, and I was left standing against the wall, alone. I'm sure that has never happened to anybody in this room, right? You always asked to dance. Somebody was always your partner. Well, what started off as a warm, fuzzy feeling of being invited, in the end, ended up not feeling so good, because I was left on the outside looking in, rethinking and wishing I might not want to have been invited at all. It's the same feeling when women or students of color are accepted into your programs or your institution, but no one wants to work with them. You're the last person they get picked for a group. No one shares the old exams with you, or they give you the versions that are no longer relevant. Or when you have faculty who make insensitive comments, who question your intellect without even really knowing who you are. It's the same feeling. The insensitivity, however, I would say, is not limited to white males. Last week, Apple's new African-American female chief diversity officer found herself in hot water after she made the following comments at a conference. And I've often told people a story. There can be 12 white, blue-eyed, blonde men in a room, and they are going to be diverse too, because they're going to bring a different life experience and life perspective to the conversation. Now, whereas her statement is not incorrect, we all have diverse experiences. It totally misses the point and supports more of the same. Environments that do not accommodate and include the perspective of multiple types of individuals tend to miss the mark. Now, because Jamie and this is engineering, I had to put up an engineering model. Diversity, so we have, diversity is important because it adds balance and hope to society, and it should be viewed as a transformational process. Think about Terrazini and Reason's model on the effects of college on students. In this model, they discuss that student outcomes are impacted by both the pre-college characteristics of students, the college experience, including the organizational context and the peer environment. If we use this model to infuse the value of diversity and inclusion, so that however the student comes to you, the experience is structured in such a way that it's deliberate around what ensures that having a sense of belonging. So why does this matter in college? Aaron Thompson from Eastern Kentucky University provides 7 key points that I believe are relevant to this discussion as to why diversity matters. First, it expands everyone's worldliness. It enhances our social development. It prepares our students for future career success. It prepares students to work in a global society. It increases our knowledge base, which then starts to help us break down some of these constant and continuous barriers. It promotes creative thinking, which gets you to increase innovation, and it enhances our own individual self-awareness. Now again, because we're engineering, we are always concerned about ABET. By including or focusing on diversity and inclusion, it doesn't mean that you diminish your rigor or that it can't be included and counted in your ABET criteria. But it actually can be infused throughout. But it does require a deliberate detailing to how you include those aspects. And here we just took the 7 principles from the model and laid them over in areas for which you could apply them in 7 of the ABET principles and criteria. The need for inclusive environments is at all levels. Opportunities to do this presents itself by partnering with HBCUs and MSIs. Now this is another slide that also looks at it from an engineering perspective. It puts everything in terms of inputs, outputs, processes, and outcomes. And it very systematically gives you just some examples of how you look at the students where they are, and you break it down by type, the students, how the faculty impacts it, the educational resources, and you're more deliberate in how you garner or develop your strategies behind them. So some concrete strategies that have been benchmarked and work in other places, and some of these things I think you all are already doing. Having bi-weekly meetings that talks about diversity issues, updating your websites. When you have job announcements, sending them to HBCUs and HSIs, incentives for faculty who want to participate in cross-cultural training, and finding ways for institutional support, and finally, looking at your policies on a yearly basis to see if your policies align with what you say your diversity goals are. So as we were saying, working with historically Black colleges and minority institutions is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to work with an institution type that has for years been developing or having environments that foster within the students that sense of belonging and support. They have a history of supporting diverse populations. Currently, there are 101 HBCUs, and we gave you this map to give you an idea of where they are located. And they're primarily concentrated in the South, with Arkansas having 3. Arkansas Baptist, Philander Smith College, and Pine Bluff. It's not just about speaking in, but also in speaking out. How can you work with these HBCUs to develop win-win partnerships that helps to strengthen the pipeline of students that transition into the institution? A key note is that although HBCUs account for less than 5% of the universities in the U.S., MSI is the same, both institutions types still graduate about 1/3 of African American and Hispanic students who major in STEM. Hence, particularly from a graduate perspective, it only makes sense to strengthen those partnerships and develop those pipelines. Because in developing those pipelines, it helps to create a critical mass of students so that when the students enter the environment, they do not feel so alone. Also, with the relationships, there can be a constant exchange with faculty for ideas and activities in an ongoing fashion so that they build the trust and deepen the relationship, which is critical to students transitioning into the new environment. I would akin it to any type of relationship or friendship that you're developing. The more I see you, the more I get to know you, the more I understand you, and ultimately begin to trust you and what your intentions are for me. A key factor into why I was willing to choose Arkansas, knowing not that much about it, is because I trusted the person making the recommendation. I knew the faculty member at Alcorn believed in me, which is why faculty are so important. In his belief in me, he believed in coming to Arkansas, I would be able to accomplish that next level and that next set of goals. As I move toward the end of the presentation, I mentioned earlier that I would come back to my experience. From my discussion last night, I learned that there have been many changes here at Arkansas in a very positive light compared to when I was here in 1997. That is good. If you recall, I also mentioned that growing up, my 8th grade grandmother constantly preached of the value of education, and what she said was that education in this country was the great equalizer. She taught us to believe in ourselves, have compassion for others, to focus in on a goal, and regardless of what the environment presented, to push forward. In attending Alcorn, these values were reinforced, and by the time I graduated from Alcorn, I was quoting the great words of Muhammad Ali, "I am the greatest." So when I decided to attend the University of Arkansas and pursue a PhD in chemical engineering, I naively assumed that I would walk into an environment that also believed in my greatness. Of course, I was scared and nervous, but little did I know that the university itself may not really have been as prepared or positioned to accept me or to continue to support that mantra. In retrospect, I had grown up in a cocoon, shielded from many of the many microaggressions, the blatant racism that really didn't help to cultivate or wouldn't cultivate a sense of belonging in this new environment. And therefore, learning in this environment was not the same. Because of that, I was not prepared for what I encountered day one upon entering the institution. Now keep in mind, I was not an 18-year-old kid, but rather a 22-year-old young woman, married with a kid. Now I picked this picture. It's a picture of Ruby Bridges from 1960 as she integrated the schools in New Orleans, because in some ways it felt that same way. But she's bright-eyed, she's bushy-tailed, dreamy. So when I came, I was bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and dreaming. On my very first day of class, and in my very first class as a student, I walked in, I took a seat on the front row, like we tell you all to do, and I was very eager, of course. The first thing I noticed, I was the only African-American or black student in the class. The second thing I noticed, there were only 4 other women. Now, this was totally foreign to what my prior experience had been. The remaining 35 students were white males. The normal chatter of students took place, and then I heard this student say, "Well, you know who majors in chemistry? Students that are not smart enough to be chemical engineers." Well, I internally gasped, because my degree was in what? Chemistry. And so I was in this undergrad chemistry class making this transition, but you know, he was a peer. So I said, okay, he's a jerk. But then the teacher came in. Now this picture is from 1995, and this was 1997. And the first words out of his mouth was an O.J. Simpson joke. Quite impactful. As I can still remember it quite vividly 20 years later. Of course, I did not find the joke funny or appropriate, but it did set a tone. I could not yield to my desire to run, so I sat there trying to process what had just happened. In the faculty and the student ignorance, within my first 10 minutes of being at the institution, I moved from excitement to a feeling of not belonging. Now, this feeling was somewhat reinforced daily, whether it was being left out, so the usual things, not being picked, the last person to be put in a group. Our group was typically the group of misfits, not having access to the questions. So the constant reinforcement that, you know, you're here, but you're not really welcome, or so at least that's how it felt. So for the first time in my educational life, I questioned everything I had been taught, including my greatness. So I cried every day for the first 3 months. Now keep in mind, I was grown, married, and with a kid, but I was in the bathroom crying every day. Until one day, while sitting in the bathroom crying to my aunt for the 5th time that week, because she was someone who provided the emotional support, and telling her how bad things were, she said to me, because this is how I was feeling, okay. And we tried, I'm sorry, I'm diverging. So you all know this is the guy from Get Out. And I really wanted to put the sound effect here. So when we did this, it said, get out. But anyway, so what she told me, she said, enough. We've talked about this. You've cried about it. You are not a failure. You're tired. You've tried, and you have accomplished a lot already. We love you, so either push past this or leave. But you're not going to keep calling me every day crying. I was like, oh, hey, Shirley. I want to tell you I stopped crying. I didn't stop crying, I just cried less, and I didn't call my aunt on those days. And she reminded me that despite the situation and the environment, I was still the greatest, and that everything about my life and education leading up to that point had developed and prepared me to be there, where I was, and that I could win. To stop focusing on the negative people in the environment, but to find those who were championing for me, who were supporting me, and dwell on that. So I changed my attitude and figured out how to survive in the environment. And those lessons have helped me even in my professional life. It doesn't change, it just transitions. So when you leave college or you leave this aspect of your journey, you're still going to be faced with these challenges in terms of diversity and inclusion, even as you move on. Something that I shared with my mentor at Alcorn much, much later and after the fact. I told him, I said, well, Dr. Stewart, I don't feel like you prepared me for what I was going into. And what he told me was, if I had told you, you may not have gone. And what I responded to him and said, yes, I would have gone, but I would have been better prepared. I mention this because as we strive for more inclusive environments, it's important that we don't sterilize it so much that when students leave, they don't know how to make those split-second judgments to adjust to the challenges that they come in contact with. So in conclusion, few things for thought. It's important to create safe spaces. And those spaces are not just safe spaces for women and underrepresented minorities, but for all students to be able to express their opinions and share why they hold certain opinions, and to have an open discussion and dialogue. To not feel like they're going to be attacked or maligned because they may have a view that doesn't fit with the mainstream. But they need to be heard if they are to be challenged in a constructive way in order, because it has to happen with everyone, not just with the few. It's important when you're bringing in new students to create that sense of belonging for all of your students. It still remains one of the most critical factors for any institution type as to why a student stays and persists. Diversity and inclusion efforts must be interwoven throughout the fabric of your programs. They can't just be, oh, those are the programs for the women students, or those are the programs for the minority students, because it just creates other resentments. So we have to figure out ways to bring everybody inclusively in and interweave what you're doing for your minority students and your Women for All students. And I was telling the dean last night, hey, hire a marketing person. You guys are doing some great things. But does everyone know what you're doing? Doing great things doesn't mean you're perfect, but it does mean that you've made progress, and that needs to be celebrated. And when you communicate your progress, that also helps people feel like they belong. And then expand your campus-wide efforts. Your only experience is not in engineering or not in arts and sciences. It covers the campus. So become a champion, be the leader, be the lead college that carries your efforts, not just locally, but across campus, so that your students' entire experience is one that is diverse and inclusive. And this last one I put here, and I have another slide to talk to conclude with it, is that it's important to have visible figures for your students to see. It's not enough to be able to get the students in. You gotta have faculty that look like the students you have. You have to have administrators that look like the students you have. They have to see people in places that they didn't think they would be. So when asking yourself, well, what's our diversity goal for students, you simultaneously, what's our diversity goal for faculty? What's our diversity goal for administrators? And not just your diversity administrator, but your department heads, your decision-making positions, because they need to see themselves in these people. Now, throughout all of my career, academic and professional, I was able to push forward because I always had somebody at the table. When I was here in my professional life, there was someone at the table championing for me, so that when someone else who didn't know me, didn't know what my potential or what I was capable of accomplishing, they were at the table to say, no, 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 no. I know she's struggling now, but she's gonna get it. And if you look at some of my champions, they're diverse. It is a wide array of individuals. They were in the room when it mattered the most. So as you continue your academic journey, as you work through your professional career, always make sure to find your champion, the person who sponsored you, who speaks for you when you're not there to speak for yourself. Thank you again for your attention. I hope I've been able to provide a thoughtful presentation for you.
Okay, so we're going to do a question and answer period. Try to speak up, and Provost Nave will repeat your question, and so that the live audience can hear it. And I will encourage, especially students in the audience and things like that. We had a good conversation about this last night, that people need to feel comfortable asking questions. So if you're thinking, ooh, I don't know if I should ask that, ask it, because unless we talk about it, we can't really make progress. So students, think about that, but the floor is open to anyone to ask questions. I know people are nervous, so I will.
Don't all ask at the same time. Yes. So I wasn't here long enough to really be able to, I think, do anything in a meaningful way to impact it. And at the time, it was very new to me. But I do think there were individuals in the department, Dr. Beidel being one, who they themselves was working with the department head and the other faculty to at least start the conversation in ways that they could improve it. And I think at that time, they saw a need to increase the number of minority students that were there so that you had a critical mass of students. And I know they worked collectively with TC on different programmings and student support services to try to help move it along. But my tenure here wasn't really long enough to do anything, which is why when Jamie called, I found it quite ironic that what I didn't have an opportunity to do while I was here 20 years later, I get to come back and talk about. So say that again.
So we haven't opened that position right now. Do you have any suggestions for how to try to bring somebody with more diversity in the department when we don't already have it? We don't have a development environment. We don't have it. What can we do?
So the question was that they have an open search. They don't have the diversity that they would like. So what are recommendations to bring in more diverse candidates? It comes to recruitment and looking at what your policies are in terms of diversity. Does your policy require that you bring in and interview diverse candidates as part of your search process, or does your policy simply say have diverse applicants in the pool? Because those two things do make a difference. The other thing is sending your announcements to places where you have minority or people who are looking to apply for positions that have heavier minority population and networking. Those would be some of the key critical items, and then just going and talking to them, doing soft shows, inviting them in for a talk so that they can see what the environment looks like as an opportunity. But from a sustainable standpoint, I think your policies is what's going to matter the most in making sure that you have diverse candidates in your department.
So you talked quite a bit, obviously, after the last question about policies, what can we do administratively to sort of create more welcoming environment, and certainly that's incredibly important. But I was wondering what you would suggest that we could do as students, sort of, since we're the ones interacting with each other the most.
Yes. So the question was, what can students do to affect it the most? Now, if I was sitting in the provost seat, I would not like the answer that I'm finna give. or the dean. Students have a very strong and loud voice. You demand it. You create, whether that's through petition, through setting up meetings, but you go as a collective group. There's power in numbers. So you go as a collective group to your, and I say follow the chain, the department head and then the dean, but you make your voice heard that having diverse faculty is of significant importance to you as a student body because you feel it impacts the overall comprehensive quality of your education. So you go sit in his office and you sit outside their door until they listen. Nope. The experience was not unique, I would say, to Arkansas. And what I later found out, it wasn't necessarily even unique to engineering. it was an experience, the graduate student experience, as many of you can attest, this is a challenging one anyway, but for minority students, particularly women, it can be a landmine that you have to learn how to navigate. And so when we get together and talk about what our experiences have been, it's a pretty intense session. And what ends up happening is that although you graduate, you have scars. And they are scars that continue to influence and impact your confidence and and your success as you move into the future. And so it's a problem that it really does need to be addressed university-wide, because it's an experience that can get pretty common to most students when they are in such low numbers. There are no critical mass. The representation is not there in the faculty or the administration. Then the experience is not always as supportive as it could be. So the question was, what were some of the strategies and things that I did to make sure that I got my point across, or that they understood my perspective? Did I paraphrase that right? Yes. One is being persistent, so continuously being willing to go back. Another valuable lesson is also myself being open and not assuming that the person on the other side wanted to hold me back. It could have just been a matter of they just didn't understand what my challenges were, how I wasn't fitting into the environment, or how I didn't feel like I was being supportive. I will acknowledge that while much of this was going on and I was doing that crying, I didn't necessarily tell anybody. And I didn't because I didn't really know who to trust. It was a new environment, and I didn't know how it was going to be received or how it was going to be taken. And so you suffer in silence, and you devise or develop other coping mechanisms. So for me during that time, I created, I like to call it my island. I started to populate my island with people who could provide me the type of support, both personal, academic, emotional, spiritual, that I needed in order to deal with the environment. But I continued to go back, and I continued to talk. And I think because I knew enough about not making people feel like I was putting them on the spot, or that, you just can't understand me, Jamie. You're hurting me, and you're not helping me. I didn't do that. I went and tried to have it in a very open, I can learn from you, you can learn from me type of perspective. And what I find is that when you do that, it opens their eyes too to things that they may not have just known and observed, because that wasn't their experience. So they're walking around kind of oblivious to what your situation is, not because they don't care, but because it's just foreign to what their experience is.
What ways will our department, like celestial body, possibly know if we're making any progress? Like, what are some ways we'll get that feedback to prepare us?
Well, first, you have to set some goals and some objectives as to where you want to be. And then you measure yourself by those goals. I think you push yourself to say we're going to start off at least at what the minimal areas that are most diverse are. But then you start to say, okay, but can we push past that? And can we be a leader in this area? And in being a leader, what does that look like? What do those numbers look like? But from a non-numbers perspective, I think it comes back to you can't capture it on a survey. You see it when you see your students being able to engage in a free dialogue of ideas, when you see that groups naturally kind of occur together and people are willing to have these open conversations, when you don't hear negative comments, or you see people just being able to more willingly focus on diversity issues. When the person who you would least expect brings you the top Hispanic candidate for the faculty pool, that's when you know you've made a cultural change within your department. But it first starts off by you all setting what those goals are. And that I can't, set, of course, for you, but that's something that you all set for yourself. And then you can quantitatively check, but I think more importantly from a sustainable point is just checking the pulse of the culture in the environment. Right? She's trying to throw me a curveball.
Okay, so when you talk about hiring diverse faculty to help minority students, are you recommending that we seek out qualified minority candidates, or are you recommending that we put preferential emphasis on the minority candidates?
So I would first start by saying, in hiring the faculty, you're not just helping the minority students. You are helping all students because you're giving them the opportunity and exposure to engage with someone who brings a different flavor to the table about your educational experience. So it's the first part of, yes, that you're looking for qualified candidates who can come in to your environment and provide that level of support to all of your students to expand their knowledge base and their opportunities for having someone who's new in the environment. But I would caution to say, one faculty member can't be the savior for all of your minority students. That's an unreasonable burden to put on anyone. And in the academic world, you're really killing their professional career. Because whereas they have a perspective, they don't have the entire perspective. Because we're diverse too. We may have similar things in background, but me, Adi, Rochelle, there are some nuances that differentiate us even as African American females, all with engineering degrees. So you have to be careful to not overstate it and understand that it takes more than one. Just like with having the critical mass of students, you need a critical mass of faculty and administrators if you are to have the impact. But it's always in finding someone who's qualified and who is, where we like to use in Provost world, who's a good fit for the institution so that they're able to have the impact that you want them to have.
How was your experience moving up the faculty ranks as a female? Was it different when you're talking to your graduates?
Now I have to say, my experience was a little different than the experience of some of my other colleagues in the college. I was fortunate to have a more progressive department head. He was a male, but his last name was hyphenated with his wife. So that right there tells you it was a little different to begin with. I told you I was Southern, right? So from that perspective, I found for my department to be very supported, and he just got out of the way and let me do what I needed or wanted to do. And so I was able to make a number of accomplishments and successes that ultimately helped me move through the ranks and then into administration. But I also think, compared to some of my colleagues, did a better job of maintaining an external network. So it's also ironic. Dave is one of the first people that I contacted when I started as an assistant professor. He was up at Texas A&M. I can't remember who connected us, but I went up to visit him. And with Prairie View being a teaching institution, I was teaching a 4-4 load. I didn't know when I was going to do some research. I didn't have a lab. So in making the connection with Dave, he became very instrumental or critical in helping me to develop or trying to understand the process of developing as an assistant professor, as an academic. And so, you know, I say he was at the table and making sure that I was there when they worked on grants. And although he left me after a year, he didn't leave me empty-handed. He connected me with someone else in the department. And I think that has been one of the beauties of in going through the experience as a student. It helped me sharpen or better refine my networking tools or creating environments that were supportive. So I took that over into my academic rank and pulling in people. And that's how I met Jamie and so many others who have been very, very instrumental in helping to continue to support what we try to do.
We've got time for one more question. So I see it right there in the back. Yeah, two.
What are the added benefits for designating a free speech zone or free speech space to having these kind of discussions rather than just using the entire university for a thought think tank?
I think there's value in both, but human nature, generally speaking, people like to be in smaller groups. The larger the group, the less likely they are to really talk. And then I think you also get into a lot of groupthink when you're in larger groups. And so people sometimes tend to behave ways they wouldn't normally behave if they were in more smaller, intimate groups. And by being smaller, you're able to have more granular level, intimate conversations. And so I think there's value in having both, but the smaller groups, you tend to, I think, get more engaged in what that conversation is. And it's easier for students, people, humans, to talk and start to build that trust because you're also building relationships while you're having those meetings.
Okay, let's all warmly thank Provost Nave for... So, I just want to say one thing, and I'm going to turn over the floor to Dean English, I believe. First what I wanted to say is there's a lot of people in this room, and there's a lot of people that were streaming online. I was checking my phone to see if anyone was sending me questions because I thought maybe we could get that. And the only thing I got on my phone was a question for me. Could you tell Provost Nave that this is the best seminar I've ever seen?
Oh,
so yes, I could tell them that. So I think it's very telling that, I mean, there's lots of people here I don't recognize, but obviously we have our department head here, we have our dean, we have our provost in the front row, we have lots of other people, lots of students, there's lots of energy. Don't say, okay, well, we've taken care of diversity for the year now, we've had this great You need to take that energy and work to the last, on the way forward. And then the last thing I wanted to leave with here is if after dinner tonight we find ourselves migrating to Dixon Street for just a minute, I would be honored to dance with you, Felecia. Thank you.
I want to thank everybody for attending today. This attendance has been remarkable, and I'm so glad we did have it in the Faulkner Performing Arts Center. Beautiful new facility here at the University of Arkansas. Provost Coleman, thank you for coming. It is indicative of the value I know that you see in view of not just simply diversity, but the concept of inclusion. And so we're very pleased. Before I get to the point where I'm thanking Provost Nave, there are a couple people here in the crowd that have joined her today. I think Dr. Thompson, I think Audie had to slip out. I saw that. Assistant Professor of Chemical Engineering. So make sure she knows that we clap for her. Okay. Give a round of applause for Dr. Thompson for being here. And then Rochelle Williams from the Provost Office at Prairie View A&M. Rochelle, thank you for being here also. Dr. Heskin was exactly right. Our conversation last night at supper was enlightening. In fact, Felecia, as we were driving home, my wife was so engaged about the conversations that we were having. And what I find as obviously a white male, 59 years old in America, is that we've done a lot in view of numbers, but we haven't done scarcely anything in the field of inclusion. And I sat in a meeting at the ASWE meeting a year ago where Dr. Slaughter, John Slaughter, past president of Occidental and University of Maryland, was convening a group of people to talk about how to break through the very thing that Provost Nave was talking about. And the entire conversation, folks, was about inclusion and how to transform the way we think, the way we behave, the way we operate culturally, changing ourselves. And so as you hear me and Assistant Dean Carter, Assistant Dean Hill, the Provost talk about what we want to accomplish on what is one of our #1 priorities for this campus is that we have to break down these barriers. We have to eliminate them. And we have a very good policy on non-discrimination here on campus. The words are fitting, I think, Felecia, everything you've said. But I would say as a point of conviction, we have not arrived. Yeah, our numbers are good, but we have so much more to do. So I challenge each of you to make a difference in our workplace, just as the Provost is so clearly described today, so that tomorrow will be different, such that people can live and work, thinking carefully, in an environment that's free of any bias or judgment that keeps them from being creative and discovering what their God-given talents are about. So, Dr. Nave, thank you for being here today. A teeny tiny expression of our appreciation, and I mean it's really small, it's within our budget allocation. But it's got a little Razorback splashed around there, and so thank you for being here. So would you please give a round of a warm applause.
So I'll just really briefly conclude. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. It was incredibly powerful for me, and I hope for you as well. And this is something we're going to continue, with regards to our efforts in diversity and inclusion. So be on the lookout on our webpage for future seminars and future events and future things that you can be involved with regards to improving the climate for diversity and inclusiveness here on the campus in the Department of Chemical Engineering at the University of Arkansas. Thanks very much.